some of the supplier screens. The first screen is for authentication of the supplier. So if they have come through a link in an email or a link on a buyer website, for instance, they need to supply the data by which we can authenticate them. Both fields will be required in this form. They're then going to end up on the application form. This will either be a new application, or perhaps if they are returning to a draft application, then they're going to end up on this, but with all the previously supplied data pre-populating the form. Let's go through the different sections on the form. The general section, very similar to the buyer one, with the same address functionality, being able to copy from registered to trading. The organization name should be passed through already, and we'll pre-select UK as the country for both addresses. Contacts, we're just going to supply a slightly more simplified process than we have done with the buyer, mainly because these are going to be external users. So we're trying to make the interface as simple as possible. We need at least one contact from them, and that contact must have an email address in order that we can allow them to save this form as draft. So bottom of the form, we've got two buttons, both disabled to start with: save as draft and submit. As soon as we've got both the name and one contact with an email address, then we can enable the save as draft button for them. That means they can come back to this at a later time and fill in the rest of the details if they want. If they save a draft, we're going to need to provide them with some sort of message if the save is successful. Please use this for now, but obviously there'll be the copy is subject to change. We need to send them a link at the same time, which will enable them to get back into the application through the initial login screen, but it should take them back to their draft application so they can continue where they left off. With regards to the submit button, that obviously we need to keep rather disabled until they've given us all the required information. So that's all the asterisked fields in the general section: at least one contact, at least one account, and a check in the data protection checkbox. With regards to accounts, again, we're offering the options to add multiple accounts, but in a slightly different way than is presented on the buyer form. What we're essentially going to do here is illustrated in this story. Yes, FS249. There's a prototype, linked in the story, which will just detail how this is going to behave. So if you fill out the account forms, as soon as the last piece of mandatory data is entered, so i.e. on blur, I guess, of that particular field, then we're going to add, surface and add another account button. If you click that, get a brand new set of account fields, and the previously entered details move above. And we also give the option to remove the second account if for some reason you realize you haven't got the data or it's been added in error. You don't need a second one. This obviously could carry on for an infinite number of accounts in theory, but I guess we may decide to put a limit on that as some sort of edge case kind of logic. As with other account, we need to make sure that the previously entered currency is not available on the any additional currency, any additional account, that we're being asked to input. Back to the form, the buyer link section, that should have at least one value which we can pre-populate because of where where the supplier will be coming from, such as the link on the buyer website. None of the additional fields are mandatory. We're going to have a further, again, not mandatory section around additional information, which is just, as the name suggests, just some extra info from the supplier themselves. Coupled with that is the option to upload a document to support that additional information. And the last piece of required info is the data protection checkbox, which we'll need. Once we've got all that, then that submit button is going to be enabled, which will enable the supplier to actually submit the application to us. At which point we need to present them with some sort of success message. Again, just please use this for now. It's very much a placeholder. We'll need some sensible wording around likely timescales for how long we will take to process the application. Maybe contact details we can give them in the meantime if they have any queries about it. So once they've submitted the application to us, it's now the full details are now viewable by an Elcom operator. Prior to that, i.e. when the application is in draft, the supplier can be searched for on the system, but no data. There'll be no click-through available in the results set table, so an operator won't be able to click through and see any details of the draft application. So the application now has 3 checks basically to be complete before we can move on to the next stage. The next stage will be submitting it for approval by an Elcom administrator. So the first thing the operator is going to need to do now is go off and look at these 3 pre-approval checks. There's a checkbox for each. As soon as one of these checkboxes is checked, we will enable the reject application button. So if it becomes apparent after one particular check that this is going nowhere, then that reject button needs to be enabled. The operator can also save the application for later, i.e. if they don't have all the required information to hand, they want to just carry out one of the checks, they could do that, save it, and then come back to it later in the same state. But we're not going to enable the submit for approval button until the 3 checks are completed, and then also further details have to be added into the buyer links section before that submission can occur. The other thing to note on the submitted application is that an operator can return the application to draft, i.e. essentially bring it back to the supplier themselves to supply perhaps or correct any missing data. That in turn, if it's sent back to draft, needs to generate an email to the supplier with another link to say, basically, we've actioned that request. You can now go back and edit your application and then resubmit it to us, at which point it will then return into the application as a submitted application. At any point during this pre-approval check process, if it's at any point that an Elcom operator changes the record, i.e. makes a check and saves it, then the application moves to in progress. Excuse me. And at that point, we then remove the saved as draft button, turn to draft from a submitted status. Once we've got the 3 checks in place, we've got those supplied, then these buttons become activated. So around the buyer link section, that enables the Elcom operator to begin adding more details to basically fill in the remaining values in this table effectively. Once we have all those bits of data, then the submit for approval will become active, and they can submit the application for an LCOM admin to take a look at as the first stage of the approval process. Other things to note, just quickly, that both these checks, which is AML and credit check, have an additional field below them, into which the operator needs to supply further information for us. Just to return to the buyer links flow a little more detail. There's another wireframe around that, which just highlights the story EFS 200. That just highlights how these should work. Again, so assuming we've supplied all of the data for the pre-approval checks, these buttons are active, which means you can then start adding details in. Once you submit that one, you get a confirmation, and then the details are populated into the table. Got one left to do. Again, once you save that, the confirmation message appears and disappears. The data is now written into the table, and you'll notice that the submit for approval button has now been activated. One last point around the approval checks and the rejection of it. If you are rejecting it, then reasons are required. You need to supply some value in this text area here. Just go back to submitting for approval. So once the application has been submitted by the operator, it's then moving into the next stage. So it's now effectively a new viewable by an LCOM administrator. The status is changed to submitted for approval. Again, as we said before, there's no return to draft available anymore, so that button still remains hidden. Approval. A couple of weeks ago, it was only ever a binary yes or no, but we've now added a sort of third option into that approval process, which is if the administrator thinks that we need some more information, perhaps to make a more informed decision. So that's covered by this kind of secondary action down here, if you like. So the primary is either yes or no, but if they want to get some more information, so I ask an operator to go off and find some more detail, we've covered that by this return to submitted, which will effectively change the status back to submitted for the operator to redo some of the checks. Both of these need to have a confirmation modal in front of them. So either a straight yay or nay on an approve, or a yay or a nay on returning it to submitted. And then also one on the actual approval of the application, but comments are not required for marking the application as approved. Once it's been approved by the admin, it's then waiting for, let's refresh this, beg your pardon. It's then waiting for activation. This requires the administrator to basically get sight of some other details, some further confirmations and contracts. Much like the approval checks, checking either of these generates a further set of fields that need to be filled in. On the buyer's confirmation side, we're going to need to see indicate that we've seen a confirmation for each buyer, and also that we've uploaded a document to cover that. That's going to be essentially one line per buyer, and the supplier contract itself, we need to specify the ID of that, having seen it. Once we've got all those bits of information, the yes to activation button is enabled. There's no confirmation modal in the way of that, but there is a confirmation modal in the way of not activating the supplier.